Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Busch History. If you've viewed any of the previous segments on Busch History, you know that I'm going through an entire American history course from beginning to end, and I should be finished sometime in the springtime, approaching the College Board's AP exam in U.S. History. Of course, the information here is useful beyond just AP U.S. History, but that is the source, if you like, or the goal for what I'm trying to do here. This is an overview, so if you have any questions beyond what I'm talking about, please feel free to email me at www.buschhistory.net. That is my website. Anyway, I want to take a look at this. This has to do with what exactly is happening in the North while the South is growing very, very dependent on cotton. I've established previously that the South is selling its cotton to the North. The North is taking that cotton and making it into finished goods and selling those back to the South at a huge profit. So in every transaction, the South is losing and the North is gaining. Well, if you take a look at the flow chart here, I'd like you to go a little further with this. There's an evolution in industrialization in the North. And we start with the domestic system, then we go to the putting out system, and go to something called manufactories. Yes, that's where manufacturing comes from, because it's men doing this. That's exactly what the word means. We start out in kind of bucolic time period at the end of the 1700s and into the 1800s, where we have something called the domestic system. The domestic system is an artisan living in his house, sometimes called a craftsman, living in his house with his family. Let's use weaving as an example. He lives there with his family and he's weaving, and everyone in his family is involved in the weaving. His wife does some, he does some, his children do some, and they do different parts of it. And he really is the master of his fate. He determines his own timetable. He determines when he's going to do what part of the task. He determines what days of the week he's going to work, and he determines when lunch is. So he's really very independent in this system. The upside is he's master of his own fate. The downside is that we have a non-conformity of standards, if you like, and one artisan can be doing things one way while another artisan is doing things another way, and it can take a long time to get them done, and it can become very expensive. However, the artisan is valued. The artisan is valued as a craftsman, and well, you want to get your cloth from this artisan. You want to get your cloth from Charles over George, because Charles does a much better job. The ability to be an expert was something that there was a great deal of pride taken in. After we start to develop surplus, and we start to go to what's called the market system, people become a little more enterprising. They say, you know what, I don't have to do the whole task. So take a look at this. We started out with this domestic system is through the beginning of the War of 1812, and then partway through, we're going to evolve to something called the putting out system. Please avoid all jokes. The putting out system simply means that we're going to get a division of labor. Instead of, let's use the leather guy now, and let's connect it to making shoes. In the shoemaking process, there are various steps. The first thing you have to do is you have to get the leather from the cows. And then you have to dry the leather. And you have to stretch the leather while it's drying. And then you have to cut the leather. And then you have to cut it to size for particular people's feet. And then you have to stitch it. And then after you have to stitch it, you have to finish it and shine it and polish it so it looks good. And then ultimately you have to package it and deliver. Those are all steps in the process. So in the putting out system, people started to become enterprising. They said, you know what? One person can take the sheets of leather and lay them out in the sun and dry them. Someone else, person number two, can take those dried skins and cut them to usable lengths. So that's person number two. Person number three can take these usable lengths and start to size them for shoes and for boots. Person number four can start to stitch these things into the finished product. Person number five can attach the soles to the bottom of these shoes or boots. And person number six can finally polish them and probably deliver them. And each of those steps occurs now in a different house. Think of it as a village with House number 1, tanning the leather. House number 2, cutting the leather. House number 3, sizing the leather. House number 4, taking that leather and actually stitching it, and so on. And that's called the putting out system, because what happens is each household does only one part, and it's put out at the end of the day to be picked up to be brought to the next house. To be put out at the end of the day to be picked up and brought to the next house, etc., etc., etc. So now, the artisan became an expert in only one part of the process. That part might be stitching. You could be the greatest stitcher, but that's all you're doing in the process. At first, it's a great idea, because instead of doing the whole process, you're doing just one part of it. In analysis, it's going to be an end to the artisan craftsman system, because the evolution of this putting out system is going to be, let's put all these people in one place. Let's put all the men together, and let's take all the factors of production and put them together under one roof. And we're going to call it a manufacturing. Man, factors of production, manufactory. So we're going to put the manufactory together. All these men who prior to this were masters of their own fate are now going to be in one building at one time, and we're going to have the beginning of, yeah, you guessed it, the assembly line, with each person doing a part of the task. So if you follow this evolution a little further, because here we are now, when you follow it a little further, some of these tasks are pretty mundane and pretty simple, and some of them are a little more involved. So now we're going to have the introduction of unskilled labor into these manufacturers, people who frankly don't have to know as much. There are people still who have to know more, but now people are not going to have to know as much. And at the same time, they're going to take this idea of this boot making, and they're going to start to apply it to other products. Eli Whitney, yes, that Eli Whitney of the cotton gin, he comes up with a theory of interchangeable parts for the building of guns. And now one barrel of one rifle fits every rifle, and one hammer of one rifle fits every rifle. So now these parts are all interchangeable, and that's going to happen in these manufactories as well. And all that's going to happen then is you're going to have huge bins of parts made, each person making one part, then you're going to have them assembled, and they're all going to fit exactly the same way. Interchangeable parts. Sounds like a great idea. That is the beginning of manufacturing in the United States. And in time, the word is going to simply evolve into factory. And then we're going to have the introduction of unskilled labor, and that unskilled labor will be called operatives, because they're simply going to operate machines. So that's the evolution of manufacturing in the American Industrial Revolution. We're going to take things we learned in England under Sam Slater, and we're going to apply them in the United States, and then we're going to grow the system beyond. And the British are going to dub this the American system of manufacturing. Not to be confused with Henry Clay's American system, although without Henry Clay's American system we couldn't have this factory system in the United States. The American system of manufacturing has to do with interchangeable parts and the development of factories. And because of Henry Clay's infrastructure, we're going to be able to quickly ship those finished goods around the country, and yes, we're going to ship them back to the South, where we're making a huge profit over everything we sell them, and the South will grow more and more in debt to the North. There's important people and terms up here I'd just like to hit you with pretty quickly. And again, if this is a little difficult to see, it is in the Topic 8 folder on the Busch History website. Sam Slater is officially the father of the American industrial mill system primarily. He was an industrial spy, came over from England in the late 1700s and memorized what the British mill system was like and brought that to the United States, and we developed the first mills from Sam Slater. Building on Sam Slater's idea was this guy Francis Lowell. Francis Lowell actually dies in 1817 before his idea can be completed, but he foresees a mill town. A town where people work in the same mill together. They live in a community right across from the mill. They go to church right down the road from the mill. They do their food shopping right down the road from the mill. And they socialize and gather in a square in the middle of this town. It's called a mill town. And the first successful mill town like this is going to involve women. And it's going to be called Lowell Mills, and that's going to be in Lowell, Massachusetts, named after Frances Lowell, you got it. And that's going to develop in the middle of the 1820s. The market revolution, as I've already mentioned, is when surplus occurs in the United States, and surplus is taken to town squares to sell. And there's a story that goes beyond this, and it has to do with why is it called market. It's conceivable that 5 people brought the same product to that market, whether it's boots or potatoes, it does not matter. And in order to differentiate my boots from your boots, Charles's potatoes from George's potatoes, they had to put a mark on these things. Now, a lot of people couldn't read and write, so they would put an individual mark, a check, an X, a circle, a face, it didn't matter. But they were marked. And now the story is that's how it became to be called a market. It's not probably true, but it is interesting that they had to mark these things. So that's the market revolution. It all occurs from surplus. Interchangeable parts, we're going to credit Eli Whitney with that when he's using it on the development of weapons and having interchangeable parts on these weapons. But think about what that does. If you can apply that to weapons, you can apply it to everything. And that's going to be the beginning of large-scale manufacturing in the United States. The American system of manufacture I mentioned a few minutes ago, that was dubbed by the British the American system of manufacturing of interchangeable parts. Duncan Phyfe, he's simply an example, a good example of the American entrepreneur who takes advantage of this manufacturing system. He makes cabinets and he makes furniture. And he starts pre-market revolution, prior to 1812, and he continues post-market revolution, and he becomes world known for making furniture and cabinets, based primarily in New York. His cabinet making system with his children, with his sons, continues till about 1849, about 1850. So he's an example of that rags to riches American myth of someone who can actually come here with nothing and develop into something. So he's a good example for that. Moving over to the other side, the Second Great Awakening. Second Great Awakening is a phenomenon that occurs not just in the northern part of the United States, it's more in the midwestern part of the United States, and certainly spreads to the northern part of the United States. It's a religious movement led primarily by women to return men to the church. And as part of the Second Great Awakening, what happens is churches become more democratic. There's more participation from the flock, so to speak. Churches become more social. You start to have dinners and gatherings at churches. Singing is now more welcome in churches, and maybe even bingo, gambling. Maybe that starts to occur in churches at this time as well. I don't know that, but it seems to make sense. So it's really a return, a revival movement to bringing men back into the church and trying to solidify the family a bit, as men have been out doing a lot of work and drinking and carousing as well. Key to this are the names. The names. Now you need preachers, you need evangelists, and 2 of them are Charles Finney and Lyman Beecher. Both are key evangelists, which means they're, hallelujah, brothers and sisters, can I get an amen? You're healed. You know, people like that. They made church entertaining. Son, you've been a sinner, come to me and I will touch you and you will be healed and you will get into the kingdom of heaven when you die. So they would do this on street corners. Yeah, it's a little funny, isn't it? They would do this on street corners, and they would attract a group around them. And remember the word evangelist, the eve of the angel. That's where the word actually comes from, evangelist. Before you die, you see the angel. And the idea is, well, maybe these people are angels. Far-fetched for sure. But this was the psychology behind the evangelist movement and the Second Great Awakening. And these guys preached in a place called the Burned Over District, which is along the Erie Canal in New York. They called it the Burned Over District because people came very quickly and new ideas came in and out very quickly, and there was a big influx of immigrants, like you burn crops for the planting of new crops in the following year. Rochester was key to that in the Burned Over District. And Catherine Beecher, yes, daughter of Lyman Beecher, sister of Harriet Beecher Stowe. Lyman Beecher, rumored to have about 17 children, kind of along the lines of Benjamin Franklin's family. Anyway, Catherine Beecher, she wrote a book. She wrote a book called A Treatise on Domestic Economy, and it was all about the importance of women in the household, and that the sphere of influence of women was in that household, that the household could not function without the woman's moral virtues and without her organizational skills. So in a way, she is an early women's rights advocate. She's not advocating that women leave the home. What she's really doing is professionalizing the home. Of course, modern day women's rights advocates would be very upset when they read her book and they talk about the importance of the woman in the home. But this is incremental, this is stepwise. We certainly started with Abigail Adams and her letters to John Adams, and we're going to go forward with people like Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton as we go forward in the women's rights movement. But you need key figures along the way. And Catherine Beecher is a key figure in professionalizing women and in the education movement. By the way, the reform movement in general will be dealt with in topic 9, which will follow topic 8, actually, which is where we are now. And it deals primarily with chapter 13, if hours out of many, but I don't want to get ahead of us. So this is an introduction to industrialization in the North. The next presentation will be a PowerPoint going through the steps of industrialization in the North. I'm going to click off this one right now, and the next the PowerPoint presentation will be a separate presentation and be labeled as such. So, see you in a few minutes from Busch History.